Hey, you guys, welcome back to Speak Out with Christine Yeargin. I am your host, Christine Yeargin, and I have been under the weather, like ridiculously sick for the last month, it feels like. I had strep for a little while and battled that holistically. A lot of you were worried about me, were like, oh no, you need antibiotics, don't do this holistically, but I did, and I'm alive. However, my immune system was in overdrive trying to fight that off. And then eventually my kids brought home a cold from school, and then I got that. And I've been coughing a lot. So in the episode, I am popping cough drops like crazy and have them in my mouth pretty much the whole time because I'm trying to make sure that I am not coughing, interrupting the guest, or making that horrible like hacking sound for you guys to be listening to. So if I sound like I have a ping pong ball in my mouth, that's what it is. It's a cough drop. And which it might also tell you guys why I sound a little bit congested still, under the weather, maybe a little bit hoarse. Hopefully I sound pretty normal to you. My husband was like, I can tell you're sick still. So, but maybe if you're not like that close to me, then I still sound fine. Anyway, today's guest is an amazing person who I recently had the privilege of meeting here in Colorado. We did an event together, and his name is Ian Haworth. Interestingly enough, he is a former Facebook employee, also worked for the Daily Wire, and now is with the Washington Examiner. He's a political commentator and is unashamed of his pro-life stance. He's unapologetically pro-life and is willing to speak out on this issue, which we are so obsessed with, the fact that men are willing to be bold in the pro-life movement. We need more of them. And we're talking about that. We're talking about men being in the pro-life movement. Should they have a voice when it comes to paternal rights? Should men be able to have a say if a woman is having an abortion or not? We actually talk about Facebook a little bit and the censorship that they do to conservatives or pro-life people. How real is it? Is it not real? We always hear everybody talk about, I'm shadow banned. And we kind of dive into that a bit. We talk about like the crazy transgender movement that's happening right now, and people who say that men can get pregnant. And Ian tells us once or for all if men can or cannot get pregnant. He's not a scientist, but he's pretty dang smart. He's got a British accent, so that makes him really smart, right? I don't know. People who have an accent sound smarter than Americans. Why that is, I don't know. It's just a fact. But it's an amazing episode. He's very well spoken. I was very impressed with him when we did an event together, so I thought you guys would love him. I wanted to bring him to you. So without further ado, here we go. If you see me popping anything in my mouth, I have unwrapped cough drops right here, literally ready to go, so you don't hear the wrapper. So if I'm just doing something, that's what it is.
Okay, sounds good.
Ian, thank you so much for joining us. I have to ask you, because I've heard it both ways, how do you say your last name? Is it Haworth or Haworth?
It's Haworth. Everyone gets it wrong,
okay.
Though, so it's kind of a rite of passage, honestly. A lot of people say Hayworth, Haworth, Hanworth, just adding letters left and right.
Haworth. Got it. So for anybody who might not know you, I recently had the privilege of meeting you and doing an event speaking with you. But for anybody who might not know you or have heard of you yet, give us a little bit of rundown of who you are and what you do, and a little bit about the speaking on college campuses that you're doing.
Yeah, so I'm a political commentator, so I talk about all manner of political and cultural issues, kind of from my perspective as, a British immigrant who I worked in tech for 8 years before doing this, so my route was kind of learn to code in reverse. It was a little random. And it all started for me in 2018. I was working at Facebook at the time in the Bay Area, so very, very left-leaning, left-dominated world. All of the Brett Kavanaugh stuff was going on. All of the Me Too stuff was going on. There was a kind of rise in anti-Semitism. I'm also Jewish, and so it was kind of a perfect storm of things where I was looking around left and right, and I really couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was really the only conservative a lot of people knew, so I kind of took it upon myself just to start talking about issues that were important, trying to give a conservative voice to an issue that really didn't have one, especially in the Bay Area. No one really defended anything that was even vaguely towards the right. It was just you assumed the leftist position was the position, and everyone else was crazy, racist, bigoted, wanted to rape women. We had various female co-workers during the Brett Kavanaugh stuff who wouldn't come into work to work with male co-workers. It's just absurd. Like, we've gone completely off the deep end in terms of craziness. And it just kind of snowballed from there. I worked at the Daily Wire. I'm not there anymore. Right now, I'm a columnist with the Washington Examiner, the New York Post. And I do speaking engagements with Turning Point USA and Young America's Foundation. And it was TPUSA in Colorado University, Boulder, where we met. And I'm really, really grateful to be on your podcast today.
Yeah. So how was working at Facebook? Like, do they actually censor us the way, I mean, everybody's like, oh, I'm shadow banned and the censorship. Like, is that real? Like, did you see that?
It was honestly a very, very interesting experience. So I kind of saw the worst, but also the best that never really gets shown. So a lot of people, when they talk about Facebook or really any other big tech company, they always assume that the CEO is like the most evil person in the world. Like they're this nefarious puppet master who's trying to influence elections, trying to do this, that, and the other. And Mark Zuckerberg was really quite the opposite, was one of the most vocal supporters of free speech, that it should remain a free speech platform. Quite often he was the only one pushing back against what seemed like the entire company wanting Donald Trump to be kicked off for years. And so that was kind of interesting to see it from the inside. Every week he would do Q&A with the entire employee base. They would all come in and ask questions and he would just openly answer them. And so that was kind of interesting. But the censorship does happen to some extent as badly as people say, and sometimes not. I think it's quite a complicated issue because you have a lot of really biased people in the kind of rotten core of the company. So what I mean by that is people who used to be like Democratic Party operatives. They come in and they work in the communications department. They work in policy. They work in the political related areas of Facebook. And then they use their power to really push things in the direction they want. And then you also have the almost inherent bias of the fact it's a tech company. It's in the Bay Area. Everyone leans left anyway. So what they see as being correct and normal is biased. And then you also have a lot of power being given over to third-party organizations. That's where the censorship comes in. So I wouldn't say it's Facebook necessarily censoring people, but the problem is they've avoided any responsibility and kind of avoided the blame by handing it off to third-party fact-checkers. Like Lead Stories is one of the worst that I always hear people talk about, who target conservative outlets, at least in my experience of them. And so that's really where the issue comes. And so there is censorship going on, but it's almost more complicated than big tech sitting there in an office thinking, I want to censor these people. It's almost worse because they've handed off power to people who are really obviously biased, and then Facebook can kind of wash their hands of the responsibility. And so I think it's fact-checking itself is one of those things where if it was done properly and accurately and fairly, kind of like community notes in Twitter have become, then it can be a good resource of people. But when you've got people who are all on the left doing the fact-checking, then you end up having only conservative things fact-checked. And we all know that fact-checking is not really all that accurate when we're talking about misleading or missing context, when you can apply that label to quite literally anything you don't like. So it's a problem, but it's a deeper problem than I think people realize.
Yeah, I've seen censorship that's so bad that it's not even like, this is wrong because it's a different view. It'll say, I posted something one time that was about, we'll say Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, no, COVID-19 is safe, or vaccines are safe. And I'm like, what? I didn't even mention COVID-19 vaccines. Like, what? They they just see something conservative and they slap a fact check on there that has nothing to do with what you're even posting about, which is insane to me. Excuse me if you guys can't hear, I've been a little bit sick. I'm trying to power through it with cough drops here. But spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't noticed, you're British. One of my favorite things about you, which actually made me angry at first, I have to say, when we spoke at the event in Boulder, everybody stood up for the pledge and there was a flag and you stood there with your hands, crossed in front of you. And I was like, what? This guy's supposed to be conservative. What is this guy doing not saying the pledge? But I asked you and you told me why. And I just want you to share that story because I thought it was really interesting. And I totally judged you at first, I have to say.
Yeah, it's something I get asked quite often. I'm not a citizen yet, so I can become a citizen, I think I can start applying now, so I'm going through that process. It's very complicated and very expensive, which I think it should not be. But once I'm a citizen, I will put my hand on my heart and I will pledge allegiance to the flag. It doesn't feel right to me to act as American, but not be one. I think it's almost disrespectful to what a pledge actually means. I don't want to play it being one. I don't want to pretend to pledge allegiance when I'm not a citizen. And so, I don't have the right to vote, but also I'm not on the same level as everyone else who is also pledging allegiance. I want to take it seriously. I want to show respect. It's almost like it's obviously not the same thing, but it's like going to a religious ceremony, saying the prayers and not meaning it. Or not really believing what you're saying, or not being a member of the community that's saying those things. I have massive respect for that, and so I want to take that seriously. And so once I am actually a citizen, I will do that. I think it's just, for me, it's just a matter of respect and taking something seriously. I don't want to play at being an American until I am one.
So something that started out as judgment for me is now like complete and utter respect. And I think that's absolutely beautiful, because what we see mostly today are people, stomping on the flag, or kids refusing to stand up in the classroom. And then you have somebody like you who is very respectful of the flag, what it means, the Pledge of Allegiance and what that means, and doing that as an American citizen and taking the citizenship process seriously. I didn't know it was really expensive. That's interesting to me.
Yeah, from when I looked, I think it's at least $700. Which is a lot of money. Like, for a lot of people, especially if you arrive here and you don't have a lot of money to begin with, that's a huge amount of money to become a citizen.
Yeah.
So yeah, a bit of discrimination there that no one talks about.
So speaking of college campuses, you recently had a situation. You talk about all kinds of things, especially pro-life things. That was one of the events that we did, and you've done other things about men having a voice in the pro-life movement. But you had a situation on the college campus where you were completely shut down, and you had protesters. Share that with us a little bit.
Yeah, this was at SUNY Albany, so the state university in upstate New York, and a group of students loosely affiliated with Democratic Socialist Group. I don't know if it was the Democratic Socialist Group who organized this, or that was just the catalyst. They showed up and, as you said, shut down the event before it was allowed to begin. So I was waiting backstage just as people came in, and then suddenly there was this massive explosion of noise, and they all marched in. I'd say 40 or 50 of these students. They were screaming in, this was a Turning Point USA event, so they were screaming in the chapter organizers' faces. They tore up a Bible for some reason. They ate all the free pizza because, socialists need to eat, apparently. And they were just making it quite clear.
They were starving.
starving activists. And then they just made it quite clear they did not want the event to go forward. This wasn't about debate. I actually openly supported their right to protest the event. I think if you're in any way politically minded, that's fantastic. The problem is when they were using the heckler's veto to really aggressively shut down debate. So they were screaming things like, F Ian, FTPUSA, whose school, our school. They were saying trans rights are human rights, which is just bizarre. I was there to talk about free speech. I wasn't there to talk about so-called trans rights, and I don't think they could even articulate what trans rights are. And so it was just a lot of aggression used to really bully people into silence. I was backstage basically saying, like, look, I either want to wait until they shut up and I'll speak. I don't care if it's 2 a.m, or I want the police there to actually enforce some level of peace and calm and remove people who are being threatening, who are being aggressive, who are refusing to allow this event to continue. From my understanding, the college administration didn't want to do that, thereby, of course, rewarding this behavior, because that was the whole goal of this, was to shut this event down. So we ended up having to be escorted to a different room on a different part of the campus, I think in the same building, but much smaller room, surrounded by police officers, and probably like 20 or 30 people came compared to the 100, 200 who were in the room originally. And so they won. But I think that's the most frustrating thing here. This happens campuses across the country. And they won. They bullied people off campus. They bullied people out of a free speech event. And it was really appalling to watch basically the college try and placate both sides. It wasn't as bad as other cases. To their credit, SUNY Albany came out and spoke in favor of free speech and kind of condemned the actions of the students. But the Riley Gaines example in San Francisco State University, they basically came out in support of the students afterwards. This is a problem, and I think colleges need to be standing up. I don't blame the students necessarily. I look at them as almost petulant children who have never been disciplined. I blame the college who are allowing them to get away with this nonsense.
100%. If the college would lay down the law, then we wouldn't have an issue. And it's disappointing to see. We've seen that with Students for Life. Plenty of our events, we've had protesters. We've had people try to shut them down. Most recently, our president, Kristen Hawkins, had a couple of situations where they came out and they had to be pulled back into a room for their safety. I think Isabel Brown was with them as well. And it's just getting incredibly out of hand because they say they're trying to protect people and they want to, they say they're for free speech, but obviously they're not. They're anti-fascist, but they're obviously being fascist. And so they're stomping on free speech. And now they're stealing pizza too. I mean, stomp on my free speech rights, we're going to have a problem. But if you take my pizza, then that means war. You brought up transgender rights briefly. And I just want to ask, did you see that thing that went viral? It was a transgender woman, so a man, who was saying how abortion pills are safer than Tylenol. It went viral on the internet for a little while.
I heard about this. I didn't see it, but yeah, I heard about it.
Yeah, it went viral. And it's just ironic to me because it's a man talking about something that supposedly has to do with women's rights. People are probably going to get offended at me for saying that, a transgender woman is actually male, but that person, transgender woman, whatever they want to be called, can't get pregnant. So why are they talking about it? We see more and more of that today. And a lot of people who were in positions of authority are talking about that. I'm sure you saw the Planned Parenthood doctor, Dr. Bhavik Kumar, who was in Congress and said that men can get pregnant. What say you?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, on a very shallow level, it's hilarious, right? In 10 years, you could never go back in time 10 years ago and explain to myself 10 years ago that we now think men and women are the same and interchangeable. It's laughable. But it's very, very deeply dangerous as well, because we're seeing two almost competing ideologies where you have feminism, which has actually been pushing for most of the time for women's rights that I think we should all be supportive of in terms of equality. And then you have the transgender so-called rights movement that are looking to really erase that. The idea that women are equal but also different, and that women deserve protections from often predatory men. If we're talking about women who are actually in danger and girls who are in danger, we're talking about men being placed with women in prisons. We're talking about rape centers allowing men to enter. It's terrifying. We're talking about very vulnerable women that used to be at least partly protected by our society, really being trampled by the transgender movement. And it's all being underpinned by a complete lie, which is that biological men and biological women are different and not interchangeable. That's just biological fact. It's not. I don't really care about offending people because the truth should not offend you. We are talking about a biological fact of our lives and all biology, in fact. And so when you've got people who are, I kind of hate the facts over feeling crowd, because I think feelings are a part of our political and cultural narrative.
Sure.
But when we're talking about, this is nothing but feelings. This is, I believe I am a woman. I'm a biological man, but everyone has to engage in my delusion. I don't really have a problem if people want to believe they are anything. It doesn't particularly impact my life as long as you're not demanding that other people also engage in that delusion. The issue is that everyone is being asked to basically admit that the emperor has clothes on when the emperor has no clothes. It's stunning to watch. I've tweeted about this a bunch of times. It's stunning to watch feminism be destroyed by a bunch of men. Like, the best women are men now. It's horrendous to watch. I think too often conservatives laugh at it because it is funny, but we're seeing real women being destroyed every day by this.
It's embarrassing. Honestly. It worries me because I have two daughters and I don't want them to have to grow up in a world where they're competing with men and something, if they're playing, whether it's an individual sport or a team sport or whatever it is that they're doing. You have like Time Woman of the Year, all of these other things. I hope that my daughters are honestly never Time Woman of the Year, because usually that means they're left leaning this day and age. Yep. But you see these men who are encroaching on all of these things, and they really are erasing it. You bring up a lot of really great points, and you say the thing about the facts over feelings, because feelings do matter. And I actually agree with you. I do say a lot of times, the same thing that Ben Shapiro says, facts don't care about your feelings, which is true to a degree. However, the reason the left wins on so many of these things is because we're painted as hateful, and because they do everything that's emotional, or they really target your feelings. Same thing with the abortion movement. They're talking about, you hate women. You want women to die, or the transgender people. You want transgender children to die. You're killing them because you're not giving them rights, or, all of these things are emotional things, and they really work. I mean, honestly, these people, a lot of them, I think a lot of the people who are pro-abortion or pro-choice, as they would probably say, they're not maybe the extremists who are super far, far left. But I think that they genuinely think that they're helping women, and they have a heart for women, and they're being manipulated by their feelings. Because I don't want a woman to die. I don't want that 11 or 12-year-old girl who has been raped to be forced to have a child. Our feelings do matter to a degree. In a lot of different ways, but especially when it comes to stuff like this, we do have to keep that in mind. A lot of men are pro-life, but they feel like it's not worth it to speak out because of the backlash that they get. You're obviously very bold in this. Tell us why it is worth it for men to speak out on the issue of abortion.
I think it's quite simple. It's because I think abortion is the greatest moral crime of our generation, if not the last century. Honestly, I think since the United States ended slavery, there is nothing more immoral than the culture of abortion in the United States. I think that's impossible to argue against. And so I think if you care about really fundamental human rights, you care about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, you care about the actual principles that the United States is built on, then you have to speak out against abortion. I don't think you really have an option. That's not to say everyone should be speaking out, because some people don't have the opportunity to. Some people don't necessarily have the interest to be politically open. But I think if I'm going to put myself in the political space and talk about issues, then abortion has to be one of them, if not the primary one. I think there are a lot of men, though, who also they kind of back out because I think they're slightly cowardly, and that they take seriously the notion that men should not talk about abortion, which is just ridiculous. They're half of the equation that ends up with an abortion being an option. And so the fact that men should not talk about this, I think, is absurd. But I also think men need to be talking about it from a position of taking responsibility. That's really the central theme of every time I talk about abortion. That is the central theme, is that men need to be taking responsibility. It's incredibly easy for men to sit there and pontificate about how evil abortion is and how women who get abortions are evil and wrong and all that stuff. And they're ignoring the fact that 70+% of all abortions happen because basically the man sucks. And so if we were able to fix that as a gender, then abortions would really diminish quite quickly. And so I think it's important to talk about abortion because it's morally important, but I also think it's important to talk about it honestly, and that men are responsible for the vast majority of abortions, and a lot of men really don't want to talk about that. Thank you.
If I would stand up if I could, if my camera went all the way. I'd give you a standing ovation there. That's amazing. How did you come to this conclusion? Like, were you did your parents instill these values in you? Obviously were born in England. Mm-hmm. What are the views on abortion over there? Are they as extreme as what we have here in the United States? Like, give us a little bit of that.
Yeah, I honestly never really thought about abortion particularly deeply until I started speaking with American conservatives about it. So in the UK, I would say abortion is one of those things that is really not spoken about. I think there are some people who are fairly radical on both sides, but it's a tiny minority. Most people simply don't want to talk about it. I think depending on the state, the laws are a little stricter than here, but it's something that people don't really talk about. I think culturally, the idea of, say, second, third trimester is pretty abhorrent. Most people almost passively agree that first trimester is where you draw the line, and then anything else is just kind of gross, but people don't talk about it. And I think, like a lot of men, I never really had to think about abortion. I wasn't going around knocking women up, so it wasn't like it was an issue that was landing on my doorstep every day. And so I kind of embraced the way a lot of men think about it, which is it's nothing really to do with me. Of course, looking back, I know how utterly wrong and immoral that was, but I understand why a lot of men reach that conclusion, because if it's not something that's in your face, you're not personally worried about being pregnant, and you're not personally worried about getting someone else pregnant, then it's not really a feature or a factor in your life. And so when I came to the US, I started talking to conservatives who seemed to me to be almost very over the top about it. It's like, oh, I've never met someone who actually is this passionate about really any issue, let alone an issue that for me was completely irrelevant until now. But then it was a real light bulb moment when you allow yourself, and I think it truly is allowing yourself to understand what abortion is, to understand the reality, like the raw reality of it as a human life that you are destroying. You can't, once you wake up from that, you can't go back to sleep. I think once you understand, I imagine it is like in some way people who wanted to abolish slavery suddenly waking up to the fact that black people and white people are the same and equal. I think once you reach that conclusion, you can't go back. You can't allow yourself to phase that out of your mind. And especially when abortion is committed to the scale it is in the United States, and you have the radical agenda pushing it as a moral good, as something that should be celebrated as a form of birth control, I find it impossible to go back. And I wouldn't say I'm ashamed of how I used to think, because I don't think it was born from a position of malice or anything like that. It's just pure ignorance. Like, I was ignorant about what abortion is. But a lot of that is also because of the environment you're in. If you don't speak to young adults and adults about abortion honestly, if you allow them to only receive the propaganda of the left, which is that abortion is a woman's right, they have the right to privacy, like murdering someone in private is fine, If you allow people to swallow all of this propaganda, of course they're going to believe that, because that's the only information that they're receiving. So I think that's why it's so important and so wonderful, like what you do, what other organizations do to actually get information out there, because unless we do that, people will just believe what they've been told. And so I'm very pleased that I've woken up from my position of ignorance, and I can't go back.
Yeah. And I want to mention too, like you don't have, like I have a story with, being in an unplanned pregnancy myself and choosing life and being pressured to abort in that situation. You don't necessarily have a story, but I'd like to tell everybody who's listening right now that you don't have to have a story to be able to speak out. I mean, the name of this show is Speak Out, and that's what it's meant to do, encourage people to speak out on this issue. And you don't have a story, right? Yeah. But you still find it very important to speak out.
Well, I think especially, I hate it when people talk about abortion and the Holocaust in the same sentence. I don't think they're really comparable. But I think it gave me a sense of, as a Jewish person, when you're constantly hearing about the Holocaust, it's like especially for European Jews, it's just a reality that you grew up with. It's like part of your community. And so when you talk about a group of people who are marginalized, who are dehumanized, I think you grow up with some level of like red flags pop up when you see other situations where that is somewhat comparable, like the dehumanization effort. I don't really look at abortion as a genocide, because I think a lot of it is thoughtless. I don't think people are actively going out trying to kill babies. I think it's almost a deeper level of dehumanization. But when you look at the dehumanization aspect, you see it all over the world, and people don't care. That's why I talk about Uyghur Muslims in China a lot, because for me, it's like, well, if we're willing to talk about, never again, the Holocaust was terrible. Politicians on both sides love to reference the Holocaust as like their metric for what's bad. But then they'll endorse abortion where millions of babies are dying a year. Or they'll happily ignore the fact that over a million Uyghur Muslims in China are in concentration camps being raped, beaten, used for slave labor. And so I think for me, you don't need a story, but I think you need a set of very fundamental, specific values that you do not stray away from in any way, in return for anything else. I think there are a lot of people in politics, whether they be politicians or commentators, who are essentially grifters, who are quite happy to make exceptions when it makes it easier. I think you need to pick a set of values and stand by them. If it means you have no friends in life, if it means no one believes you, you get no clicks, it doesn't matter. You need to choose values that matter and go with those. And the fact that human life is valuable, whether that be in the womb or in a concentration camp in China, all life is valuable. And so I think you need to stick by those values.
Yeah. When it comes to feelings, like we were talking about earlier, people really want to feel comfortable. Yeah. They don't want to talk about things that are uncomfortable, but we have to. I mean, if nobody talks about these things that are uncomfortable, this is how we got to where the Holocaust was. When people kind of internalize things and they don't want to speak out, or they don't want to be the person who's bold in this, I promise you'll gain a lot of friends if you do. I mean, you might lose some. I've lost friends. I'm sure you've lost friends, but you will gain a lot of friends if you do. But it's so incredibly important to be that voice. I'm curious where you stand on like the issue of paternal rights. When we talk about abortion, a lot of times we talk about the mom, the mother, the baby, and a lot of times we're not talking about the dad. And if he should have a say in the woman getting an abortion or not getting an abortion. I don't hear people talk about this super often. Do you believe that the dad should have a say, or like what sort of like paternal rights should be involved in this issue?
Yeah, I think this is something I get asked quite often. And for me, it's almost too late. If you're getting to the point where a man and a woman are arguing over whether or not they should murder their unborn child, then I think maybe you've chosen the wrong man or woman to be with. I think it's all about making decisions based on a shared set of values. And if you disagree on what life is, then I think that's a pretty fundamental value. Of course, men should have rights in terms of that conversation. It is something they have made together. I think if you're being forced to say who has more rights, it's obviously the woman, because the woman is carrying that child. That doesn't mean I think she has the right to kill that baby. But I think, unfortunately, in the world we live in, there's also a level of sexism. It's in the same way that whenever a couple are getting divorced, people often assume the man is in the wrong. And I think in a lot of states as well, the woman often gets a far easier time during a breakup or, say, a bad relationship. People assume the woman is the victim, the man is the aggressor. And so I think there is a level of sexism there where parents don't have the same rights. If you look at custody battles, almost always the woman will win. And so I think it's like a deeper issue here. You need to be having sex once you have shared values. And I think a lot of people like to skip that conversation because it's a little awkward, a little difficult, and people would rather just have sex without any consequence. But I always say, like, yes, I think men should have rights, but I would rather you be having sex with someone who shares the same values as you. So that's not even a conversation. That should be the goal. You kind of, the cat's out of the bag on that one if you're waiting until you're pregnant to have that conversation.
Yeah. Shared values and married, I would say.
Yeah.
You should definitely be married because that avoids a lot of this. You have the person, you know, I mean, obviously there is divorce. So, you know, it doesn't mean that somebody's not going to leave you ever, but it at least eliminates that to a really high degree that you don't have to worry about somebody's going to disappear. As somebody who learned that the hard way and has had an unplanned pregnancy and was a single mom for many years, I can tell you that I 100% advocate for sex within marriage. Obviously, marrying somebody who has the same values as you, I think it's so important that they have the same values. What has been the biggest eye-opener for you since speaking out on the issue of abortion as a man?
I think it's the both the dismissiveness and the utter hatred pro-abortion people have for men who dare to speak out. And also the hatred they have for women who speak out. I think it's really just the virulent, horrendous anger that is sparked by the issue of abortion. It seems so backwards to me that the side who are in favor of abortion, who are in favor of killing unborn life, which is biologically, scientifically what it is, they are so aggressive about it and so hateful of anyone who disagrees. You'd almost think it was the other way around, where the people who are trying to defend life are the more aggressive, who are the more potentially violent because they're acting to try and save life. But I guess it also makes sense that the side who is willing to kill millions of unborn babies don't care about being violent to defend that right. Yep. I think for me, though, it's like a common thread through all of these political issues. It is the complete lack of really any scientific understanding. In the last couple of years, we've been beaten to death with the club of the science. We must listen to the science. The science is important. Listen to experts. And it's meaningless, right? It's just a meaningless phrase now. I somewhat understand in the past the idea of abortion being a little more socially accepted because you didn't know really what was going on in there. I think unless it was a later term in the pregnancy where it was obviously a baby, when you could make the argument it's a clump of cells when you don't really know what's going on. It's a very magical gray area, completely unknown. We know exactly what is going on. Every single stage of pregnancy, there is no other argument to make that it's a human being before and after, except for the point of conception. The point of conception is where you go from not human to human. Everything else is a human being. And I think the fact that we are, as a society, supposedly so educated, so intelligent, so advanced, and yet we are walking backwards in the way that we view each other and human life. It's stunning to me that more people I speak to do not agree with me really immediately. Like I speak to a lot of supposedly intellectual, educated people. You know, a lot of them have advanced degrees in various levels of sciences, and they think, oh yeah, you should be able to have an abortion. It makes no sense to me that you can be scientifically minded. You can have all of the tools you need to reach a very obvious conclusion and just completely go off the deep end and think the opposite. It's stunning to me, and I think it's indicative of how difficult a problem this is going to be to solve when you have so many people so deeply rooted in this view. It's going to be a generational battle to undo, and I think it's going to be almost every generation we're going to have to be having the same battle because people really want to kill their babies because they really want to have sex with no consequences. That's really what it comes down to, and that's a biological reality we're always battling with.
It's unfortunate. Hookup culture has created such a monster almost. And, you know, the pushing sex sells, they push sex at every, you know, corner. It's on billboards, it's in movies, it's on, you know, the commercials. Even if you're not watching something that is sexual, but it's on a commercial, you literally can't get away from it in this day and age almost. You are very well spoken. Obviously you're educated and smart. Education doesn't mean you have to be, or that you are smart in the ways that we were just talking about. I want to do something really quick before we end. Okay. I haven't done this before, but it's more of a rapid fire question. I've got 5 questions for you, but you have to be as brief as possible. And yes or no is fine. There's a couple questions that are not yes or no questions. Actually, I'd say maybe the last one is one that's not a yes or no question, but we're going to do rapid fire really quick. Ian, can women become excuse me. No, we got to start over.
That sounds like it was going to be a yes.
No, I know. Ian, can men become women?
No.
Can men menstruate?
No.
Can men get pregnant?
No.
Should men have an opinion on abortion?
Yes.
No uterus, no opinion. How do you respond?
I think what organs you have should not dictate your sense of what life means and the value of life. It's like saying, don't have slaves, you can't have an opinion. It's absurd. It's morally defunct.
Wonderful. That was the first rapid fire I've done. If you could share one piece of advice for the listeners who are listening right now, you guys, if I sound funny when I'm talking, it's because I've got a cough drop in my mouth. I apologize. But if you could share one piece of advice for those who are listening, encourage them to speak out. This is how I end every single show. What would that one piece of advice be?
I think it's to find a way to speak out that works for you. Not everyone can speak out in the same way. Like, not everyone can do what we're doing and put our face out there and speak so openly on an issue. I think we all have to find a way where we can both look ourselves in the mirror and live in line with our values, whether that means supporting other people who are being more public, supporting organizations, adopting children, anything you can do. This is a collective battle that we all have to be pushing in the same direction. And so as long as you can find a way to push in that direction, don't feel like you have to be doing what other people are doing. Find a way that works for you to push for what's right, which is the rights of unborn life.
Absolutely. Ian, thank you so much for joining. It has been an absolute pleasure. I can't wait to get this episode out because I know everybody's going to love it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really